You have a vague memory of the Pod Boys. But is this memory real? Are you real? Is anything real? I don't know. I'm Mr. Balls. Reefer Sutherland.
I'm Mr. Teeth. My brain is fully in the lament configuration right now.
No, Ben, I'm Mr. Tease.
Yep, good point.
Hi, y'all. I'm Mr. F. And I have noir idea what's going on.
I'll press F to pay respects to that joke. Good one. Well, guys, we have quarantine brain.
Yes.
Well, we do actually
should
have.
talk
We have
a little
cabin
bit.
fever,
We
for
should talk
sure.
a little bit about this before we go on. We had several, upcoming theater movies planned.
We sure did.
That's not happening.
Nope.
Likely anytime soon.
Nope. I know some are coming directly to VOD, which is cool. We can still cover some of them.
Yep.
But definitely won't be box office.
No, yeah, this might change the face of our predictions game for the rest of the year. Because probably not going to be much box office for the rest of 2020.
Yeah, this is a little piece of
Well-
history. Y'all get to watch us as we slowly develop more cabin fever from each podcast to the next.
Yeah, well, it's gonna get crazy. We're only a week into quarantine, and we're already losing our collective minds. Well, this week, as you probably heard in our last episode, was supposed to be A Quiet Place 2. The coronavirus saw to that. That movie's not going to be coming out anytime soon. So instead, we had to pivot, and this week was Cleveland's pick, and you chose a film that none of us have seen before, despite the fact that it's 22 years old. We're going to be talking tonight about 1998's Dark City, directed by Alex Proyas and starring Rufus Sewell, Kiefer Sutherland, Jennifer Connelly, and William Hurt, about a man who struggles with memories of his past, which includes a wife he cannot remember and a nightmarish world without a son. Cleveland, this is your pick. Tell us a little bit about why you chose Dark City and just give us a little bit of an overview.
Well, exactly like my last pick, The Guyver.
Lest we forget.
I won't anytime soon. Just like my last pick, this was a film that I saw the trailer for when I was in high school, like ages ago. And it's just always clung to the back of my brain, and I've occasionally heard it referenced and have always wanted to see, because from the trailer, it seemed like everything I aesthetically love. Big spooky gothic towers. It's all very Gotham-esque. It's all very Batman.
Neo-noir.
Exactly.
This film
And
is.
that's my jam. I
Expressionist,
love
too.
neo-noir. I love noir. I love cyber noir. I love, if it's noir, I'm a fan. I was pretty keen on this film, but I was a little concerned considering how budgeted this film seemed for when it was made, and that I hadn't really heard of it. That can sometimes be a bad sign. I was just generally intrigued, and I thought, why not? Let's pick it. Let's see how it is. I enjoy covering films on the podcast that none of us have seen before. It's
Same.
more of a collective-
Especially older films.
Yeah, it's a nice collective exploration. Yeah, definitely with older films, because we can kind of pick out what fingerprints this movie has on other films and vice versa, and that's always a treat.
Man, this thing is covered in fingerprints
Yeah.
and left lots of fingerprints.
Yes.
For a movie
Collective
that is
memory, which feels very fitting
very
for this
appropriate. Yeah, it's weird. I'm really glad you picked this one. I've been wanting to watch it for a long time as well, and had just never gotten around to it. It is weird how much it feels like this movie influenced like a bajillion other films that came after it, despite the fact that this movie is very much like a cult classic. I don't think it's really talked about all that much. I, for one, really enjoyed it.
Same.
I loved it. Good. I thought it was
I had
pretty
a
good.
fucking blast.
There were a couple things where I had reservations, and there's certainly some dated effects, to say the least.
but that's so much of the fun for me, which is
It's
probably why it
very-
didn't do well at the time. I don't know. Like,
It's very weird
it didn't-
and gets extremely hokey, but it's like it's hokey in the ways that I enjoy. I think that the stuff that has not aged well and maybe was never good to begin with is part of the charm for me.
I think it definitely adds to the fun of the movie. My only major gripe, and I would just want to get this out of the way now, is the first like 30 to 40 minutes is a little slow to get started.
Oh, interesting. I actually really liked the beginning.
But once it kicked into gear, it really kicked into gear.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was completely on board. Well, it's funny how you mentioned like this felt like it influenced so many movies after the fact, and I feel like on the flip side, it's also very directly referential
to a lot of things that came
a lot
before
of other
it.
movies, whether it's Blade Runner or
Seven
or Brazil or
Hellraiser.
Yes, Hellraiser, definitely.
Hellraiser.
Metropolis, as you pointed out while we were watching Cleveland, I definitely see the comparison.
The miniatures, the giant heads, you know.
I mean, it is, yeah, it's a noir film, and noir is a direct link to German Expressionism, and I think that this movie goes back to a lot of those roots, which Metropolis is a famous German Expressionist film, but, you know, you can even see, I saw parallels to, like, other Fritz Lang films, specifically, like M, and even some Ministry of Fear stuff, you know, crazy conspiracy theories. Like, this goes way farther than Ministry of Fear does.
Way.
But I think it I think it has some of the same themes of paranoia. I mean, well, a lot of themes of paranoia. This movie is really weird. It's almost like a nexus of like references, because you can see all of the things that it's directly quoting, but then out the other side, you see all of these films that have come after it that are very heavily influenced by it, primarily The Matrix.
The Matrix feels like a ripoff.
The Matrix does feel like a ripoff after watching this.
And the thing about The Matrix is, like, the Wachowskis in interviews have always referred to it as their attempt to make a live-action Ghost in the Shell, and I would say this film is way more comparable. Dark City is more like The Matrix than Ghost in the Shell is.
Yeah.
As our friend Jaleesa pointed out, too, while we were watching the film, that, like, the entire arc of this film feels like the first act of The Matrix. And also the last act as well, like, in that final
it's like
scene.
it skips over the middle part of The Matrix.
I think for benefit.
I mean, yeah, I don't think The Matrix has aged particularly well. That's a different discussion. But even
The Wire works fun.
Even outside of The Matrix, I guess 5 years after this movie, I think Saw pulls a lot of stuff from this movie, especially in terms of the aesthetic. You also mentioned Inception, and I think that there's a little bit of that in there as well.
Big churning buildings. It's all dream-like.
In terms of style, I saw a lot of oddly like French expressionist movies, like Amelie or City of Lost Children.
Oh yeah, that's
or
actually a good point.
Those came out like a couple years before this movie, and one of the things I really was impressed by, beyond just the excellent production design, was how colorful the movie was.
Yeah.
You know, you get these splashes of really vibrant colors from the get-go. I was really impressed by that. I was expecting something more gray and monochromatic and drab, especially after knowing that this director, Alex Proyas, before this, he had done The Crow, which I really like, but it is kind of a drab movie at times.
Well, I think what's you bring up a really great point, that this film is very colorful, but it still feels necessarily bleak, and I think it's because that they're really consistent with their color palette. Mm-hmm. It's extremely colorful, but it still feels kind of, it's not drab, but monochromatic almost. There's lots of greens and blues and oranges and stuff.
In almost Blade Runner fashion.
Yeah.
That's a big one I think that needs to be brought up as well.
Yeah, Blade Runner's a
especially
big
with
one
like
for
the
sure.
large practical backdrops of the cities via miniatures and
The miniatures
the
in this
use
are
of
great.
fog and neon. It's they're lovely. I absolutely adored them. Another important reference, I mentioned Gotham a second ago, but very specifically like the Batman original animated series. I'm a big fan of that style of like impossible Gothic architecture. This movie just oozes style.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth mentioning too that of all of these works that it has influenced and it has been influenced by are generally more known and successful.
Well, I think this
I don't
is
know
a
how
pretty
well this movie did.
well-recognized cult classic. If I remember correctly, Roger Ebert only did like 5 commentary tracks while he was live, and this was one of them.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that, actually.
Awesome.
And
Good.
it was really well critically acclaimed at the time. I don't know how successful box office wise it was. You know, I assume it wasn't like insane or anything.
Because I get the vibe, again, with no research at all, that it's fallen out of memory, that it's not that well known. It could just be that I didn't know it very well and I'm projecting, but
I mean, I think you're right. I don't think it's talked about in the same broad circles as stuff like The Matrix, which in many ways does feel like it's ripping this movie off. It came out a year after Dark City.
And that's the point that I wanted to lead into, that the things that influence this film and that were influenced by this film are generally more known, remembered, broadly circulated than this one, because they stick to singular facets of this film and not all of this movie. Because there's a lot of movie here.
There are a lot of things
movies,
happening in this movie.
A lot of ideas and a lot of exposition. What I will say is generally the exposition is done with a ticking clock, or there's something unique and fun about it. So I never really was too bothered by like the exposition being thrown at you, because at least like someone was running or something there was something else going on in the scene that enriched it.
It's surreal enough that I don't mind certain things being explained to me, because I think they'd be completely incomprehensible otherwise. And this is a movie where certain things should be ambiguous, but definitely not all of it. Some stuff I think does need to be absolutely explained. We should mention that we watched the director's cut, which came out in 2008.
About 13 minutes longer, if I remember correctly.
And I was reading that the theatrical cut had some pretty heavy studio oversight at the end of production, saying that it was too confusing. And so, similar to the original cut of Blade Runner, they demanded voiceover narration. I don't know by which character, but they said people are not going to understand this, so we need to make things more explicit. And this version we watched came out 10 years later and is Alex Proyas's original vision. We obviously haven't seen the theatrical cut, but this feels like a complete artistic vision to me.
I almost wonder.
I was left with very few questions.
Tonally scattered at times, and certainly convoluted.
Yes.
But like it
with
feels,
intent, at least.
Yeah, it feels like feels like everything has intent behind it. I think that Alex Proyas probably could have cut some of his ideas.
Yes.
I think slowed them down.
The thing for me is like it definitely is way convoluted, and like I think part of the reason I wasn't completely on board for the first like 30-40 minutes is there's not that clarity of ideas until everything kind of clicks into place.
Yeah, it in Eastern fashion, very anime-esque, you are just thrown into this world. So you have very little like attachment to anything. So the weird like terms people are using, all the strange little events mean nothing. So they all feel extremely surreal because there's no context for anything. There's no title crawl or anything Western to give us a sense of foundation.
That's why they did a voiceover at the during the introduction in the theatrical cut. Honestly, though, like the way this cut works, like it felt right to me because it felt very noir. It starts with a mystery and the pieces do not fit because you don't have enough of them. This one takes that to the extreme because it's introducing like weird supernatural sci-fi elements, but it still feels, as a noir narrative, it feels consistent with that idea. It's like, I have no fucking idea what's going on, and neither does my protagonist, and all of this shit is weird and confusing.
Yeah, it's like 90s anime Philip K. Dick. Such a weird one.
Probably the weirdest movie
aesthetic,
we've watched since The Guyver.
Yes.
Thanks, Cleveland.
You're welcome. The aesthetic comparisons aren't where it stops when I bring up Blade Runner. Also the idea of false memories, of, not knowing exactly who or what you are and what you can believe is real, which definitely, I think about probably up till that same point in the film that you were concerned with the movie, Ben. I think I said at one point, like, the ending of this movie could be very annoying. Like, it has the potential to be extremely frustrating because you get to the point where you're thinking, like, is it all in his head? Is he sleeping? Is it one of those? And
thankfully, they decided to take it in a weirder direction and just let it be weird.
Yeah, they're not all dead. Like, no bullshit like that.
I mean, it's
thank you.
I think in many ways it's way dumber than that.
Yes,
but
somehow.
but like really, really fun. Like dumb in like the greatest way.
Well, dumb in a way that they still like dumb with intent.
Yeah.
They commit to it too.
Yeah. And bless them for it. That's all I could ever ask for.
And part of that is also just like the age of the film. A lot of the stuff that makes the ending particularly hokey is like very bad CG. So I wonder if it would have seemed as dumb if you'd watched this movie in theaters back in '98. But I think that this movie has aged like cheese.
Yes,
like,
well said.
It's still good, but man, is it a lot stronger. is the flavor a lot stronger and sharper.
It's a very French cheese, this movie. Like it's strong, it is pungent. But like it's got a tang to it that like a lot of people won't like, and I love.
What I will say though, in terms of like pacing the weird stuff, I think that it actually paces some of that pretty well, because like I found myself taking the film a lot more seriously in the first act, and then they started to introduce like things that had us giggling, like that's really silly, and then by the end when we were straight up like cackling
in tears, I was rolling.
It felt like it worked me there instead of just flipping a switch.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
That's definitely true. I almost feel like it could have been a little slower in that respect.
Oh, I don't know.
Ramping it up.
I won't get into it because we haven't really talked about the plot yet. But we'll get back to the billboard scene. Well, that was so much.
Ooh, that
scene
funny,
was just rapid fire nonsense. I loved it. But
this movie is pretty convoluted and the details are not particularly important.
Necessary, yeah.
So I don't feel the need to like try to walk through the plot, because I think that is almost doing the movie a disservice.
Unless you want to try to explain the plot. Because I think that could be funny.
In 2 minutes or less.
Well, I mean, bullet points, the broadest strokes. I'll start with another influence, which actually came out almost exactly the same time, which is Cube. I'd consider this a Cube film. Also, like, it fits within the genre of person wake up, not know what happened, find out what do, how world do, and go. And that's what do with movie. It's a lot weirder than Cube Room. It's
way weirder.
Cube City, even. But no, I mean, that's the essential of it, and everything else we've said about it being noir-esque. It breaks it down. Kiefer Sutherland is shouting things at him, and he only has 24 hours. Jennifer Connelly, there you go.
It's necessary for your protagonist to have amnesia in a film like this, because like you as the viewer have a lot to learn about this world.
Yeah, could you imagine if it started with the detective?
Yeah, I know. No, thank you.
Yeah, that'd be awful. If you had a protagonist who knew what was going on in this world, like, oh, absolutely not.
It's like, he doesn't know what's going on. You don't know what's going on. But I actually really like the sort of disorientation in the beginning of the film.
Oh, definitely.
Because like you're so like desperately trying to ground yourself and trying to figure out like what era this is set in, whether this is supposed to be reality or something beyond, and considering like what we find out is actually the case, I think that's like the way to do it.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Agreed.
I think that
I like that genre.
I almost feel
a lot
like
of people consider it a cop-out.
Yeah.
To have your protagonist like wake up with no memory.
It's very video gamey.
Yes, and it's
felt like a BioShock, the first BioShock for a lot of this movie.
Indeed,
to me.
and it can be utilized as a cheap trick just to immediately gain a sense of relationship between the protagonists and the audience, because they too understand nothing about what's going on in this weird world. I rarely have a problem with it. I tend to enjoy Cube-esque films.
I just feel like American films especially hardly do this kind of shit anymore, where they just plop you down in a strange unreality with no explanation.
Yeah, it's all
I think that like
hand-fed.
so much of it does indeed have to be like spoon-fed to you, and I know this was more common back when this film came out, but like I respect the balls to do that.
Yeah.
To just say like, this is not the reality that you know, and you're just gonna deal with it.
Yeah.
And like
Figure it out.
right. I really respect that. But yeah, the protagonist, John Murdoch, wakes up in a bathtub, Saw, with no memory of how he got there, Saw, and finds
and
gets a call.
and gets a phone call from a mysterious stranger, Saw, and there's a body that has spirals drawn all over it, Saw. And essentially just kind of like has to try to put back together his memory. Also, we didn't mention Memento, but
yes, thank you. I was just
big Memento vibes in this movie. Yeah, he discovers that the city that he is in is abides by much stranger laws than one would expect.
Man, okay, I have another good metaphor for this film. This movie is a hodgepodge Lego set movie of all the Lego sets that I love.
Yeah.
It's a weird Lego
that.
set castle, and it's got like the sci-fi bits, it's got the weird like castle-y bits, it's got all of my favorite little Lego sets just cobbled into this mess. Yeah, it's very much a nexus, like you
It's
said.
like it is a mess, but I would consider
fun
I would
mess.
consider it a beautiful mess.
it's glorious.
Yeah.
The kind of shit in this movie that would frustrate the piss out of me in other movies, I've found charming and delightful.
Yeah, well, it's a mess of like a million different ideas at once, but it all comes together, especially in the third act, so well that I can't help but respect it.
As convoluted as it is, it has a lot of extremely cool concepts.
Oh, if this movie was done now, I'd love that.
You know, I think this movie would be good like TV show material.
Oh, HBO, pick it up.
Like an HBO,
Yes.
like an HBO dark, maybe like a limited series, like one season.
Oh, I mean, speaking of comparisons,
just
Westworld.
spread it out a little bit.
Yeah. Like,
Westworld is a good comparison too.
yeah. I know, like, if you who is listening haven't seen this movie and you've made it this far, are a little put off by us just being like, oh, it's like this, and oh, it's like this. Watch it.
It's really like that.
It is
like
very
that.
much like I generally like prefer to just pick a comparison or two, but you just can't with this movie. It's
impossible.
So many
There's
movies.
So much stuff going on.
I think, and that's actually a great segue into some of this more conceptual stuff. You mentioned earlier, Ben, that it is sort of an amalgamation of like a collective consciousness, and thematically that is extremely appropriate for the film. Somehow we've managed to avoid major spoilers up till this point, so
We've been doing this for a while.
spoilers from this point out for somehow I didn't have a 22-year-old movie spoiled for me, so I think that goes to show what a cult classic it actually is. But we find out eventually in the movie that the villains, these weird, bald Cenobite psychic vampire things, they call the Strangers, are essentially an alien race that has abducted a bunch of humans to study what makes us individuals, because they are a collective conscious and want to be individual. So they've fabricated this massive city in space that they change every night at midnight and swap memories and stuff around. So everybody who lives in the city has lived many, many lives, and the Strangers change the architecture and the nature of reality with their wills.
It's like every Star Trek episode. All of them. All of them.
There's a particular moment
can't
where
even-
it
I won't.
feels
I won't. We'll be here for a long
extremely
time.
Star Trek, where they see the Shell Island mural, and they break it open.
Oh yeah, it's
And
just space on the other side.
And
The void.
The final frontier.
To me, that just screamed Star Trek.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like that's very Twilight Zone. Like, just that, like, they're not where they think they are. There are strange things controlling stuff. But no, actually, you know what though? Like the first episode of the original series does have like aliens that are manipulating like their reality for Commander Pike. Yeah, that's
Sure.
the first episode. So, that shifting effect that was very popular in the 90s where everything kind of like warps and gets morphy. They love that.
This was definitely like a time capsule
Deep
of a
Space
very
Nine.
particular moment in special effects.
Yes, they show off everything they had in the book.
I mean, we
for
can
that time.
we can go back to like the Matrix comparison too. It's like the Matrix came out a year after this movie, and even
only?
only a year later.
Oh,
Even some of like the CG effects are almost identical to stuff in this movie, and just
Wow.
like the whole concept of the Matrix is like living in a manufactured reality and being studied and used by something alien and other is like the Matrix just fucking ripped off Dark City.
I won't. Yeah, I mean, if it only came out a year before, I don't know what the production pipeline of the Matrix was like and how long it was. But
Here's the reason that I become more and more certain that this movie did, or that the Matrix did rip off this movie, is because I don't think the Wachowskis are actually good filmmakers.
well, I mean, all of the films that I certainly like enjoy of theirs are adaptations of other writers' work, except for I actually do like, what was the Netflix one?
Their show Sense8.
Sense8. I actually
I never
like Sense8.
watched
Never watched
Sense8,
it.
but I do not like the Wachowskis. I do not think the Matrix has aged particularly well.
That's
but
a common
I think the things that are still good about the Matrix and that were good about the Matrix, you can draw a direct line back to something in Dark City.
Sure.
What I like about Dark City is that like it takes that core concept and makes it feel truly alien in many ways, and I love the idea of this world being a massive shifting experiment because the aliens are literally trying to find the human soul, because being part of a collective is so nightmarish, and which is an idea that I love.
Yeah.
It's almost like the inverse of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where they're not trying to make people part of the collective, they're trying to figure out how to separate themselves from the collective.
I like Invasion of the Body Snatchers because like they're actually like taking on their flesh as well. They use their corpses to puppet around, as we find out that's what all the Mr. whatevers are. And
they all have Mr.
was-
something as their name.
Yeah, I in obnoxious fashion was going to use the Borg as a comparison and say it's like the Borg if they had the exact opposite agenda.
Rather than assimilate, they want to de-assimilate.
Yeah, and-
Dissimilate. That's a word. Dissimilate.
It is now.
I think it is. I'm pretty
If
sure
it wasn't
is.
before. It sounds like a word. That's what matters. They're obsessed with identity. Yeah, they want to find the opposite. I like that.
The sort of like sub story is like William Hurt as this detective, like trying to track this serial killer who they believe is John Murdoch, and we find out is because the strangers have imprinted the identity of a serial killer upon him to see if with that identity he will stay true to that nature or his own, and whether he will kill on his own, which I think is a really cool idea. And we see that he does not, that he, despite the fact that they have made him a killer, that he is not inherently a killer. And I think that like as an experiment to try to find out like what makes an individual, I think that concept is extremely cool.
And also, like, for as convoluted as everything is, you can boil it all down to it's an alien abduction
Yeah,
experiment.
totally.
Like, it's just these are all people who are just plucked off of Earth and put in an experiment by aliens.
And you can't place the era because the Strangers even say that they have constructed the world as an amalgamation of many eras.
And they're constantly tweaking and changing, like kids with a play set. And I love that. Like that's super fun.
The Strangers are hokey in the best way, but also very cool. I really like their underground Senate room where they perform
that's a new favorite
the tuning
with the giant, head as kind of the centerpiece.
So Metropolis.
It's so much fun.
The giant face that opens and reveals a massive clock that puts everybody to sleep at midnight so they can rearrange the world and implant new memories in people. I thought that was very cool.
Oh, it's great. And they're all like lined up, and there's just like rows upon rows of them.
They all look like Pinhead. They're all bald and pale
and Chatterer, because they do the teeth.
Yeah, they do the teeth chattering thing.
I call them the Senate bites because they're all gathered.
Yeah, it's true. Like they do sort of have that like Republic sort of vibe to them. I mean, which makes sense. They're a collective consciousness. They're all named Mr. some kind of object. Their leader is even is he really a leader because they're a collective consciousness, but Mr. Book, and the main villain we see, Mr. Hand, who he's really great. I really like Mr. Hand.
It's amazing out of all those
Mr.
bald,
Wall.
pale actors dressed in black, like how much he stands out just from his smile.
And just like his general performance,
Like it's awesome.
For a little while, I did think he was Brad Dourif, until I looked it up and saw that he was not Brad Dourif, but he has kind of a similar vibe.
He does. It's a very unique look.
Yeah, I like that they have the child one too, Mr. Sleep.
Oh yeah,
who just likes to bite things inexplicably.
I like that they made it that he was the one who set up the murder.
I will say one of the things that I don't think works, and this is largely because this is largely one on the effects. I wish we did not know like the true nature of the Strangers, that they're just like brain squids, psychic brain squid, because that effect is terrible.
Yeah, we're back to the previously the aforementioned billboard scene.
Well, yeah, where John first confronts them and learns that he has the ability to tune.
Yeah, that scene had all of us shouting, in the best ways. It's just rapid fire crazy. We see like the tuning ability stuff for nearly the first time. We see what the Strangers are with the weird glowy aliens in their heads.
Yeah, they bust one of their heads open.
We have the billboard like hand coming down, which Ben called very funny. And we were kind of like taking bets on it. It's like, oh no, they cut back to it. It's definitely going to happen. And then sure enough, so many wacky things in that one very short sequence.
It's very anime, flashes of anime.
I really like that sequence. But like my big point is like I would be fine just knowing that as they tell us in the movie, we use your dead as hosts.
That would have been way spookier without it. I agree.
Without actually, because in that scene, that's relatively early in the movie too. Like within the first 30 minutes, where the hand of the figure on the billboard swings down and busts open one of their heads, and like a gelatinous mind squid comes out, and it looks terrible.
The splatter effects look fun. I do like the weird black goo that explode when they whenever they get detonated or squished.
Sure.
But no, the CG.
And I almost feel like that overplays its hand a little bit.
Agreed.
It kind of removes some of that ambiguity. And like I was saying at the beginning, it goes into my problem with the first act a little bit, in that it's a little much until it all clicks together. And I think that's a great example of it, where it goes too crazy at the beginning, where they could have pulled that back a little bit.
I would have liked that to be a bit more restrained.
To write it off at that moment. It's not hard to do that for sure.
I would have been more okay with it if it came up in like the third act, for example.
Honestly, even the second act, I think I would have been okay with, because at that point we already have them like like cartoonishly like
Floating,
around
yeah.
the city,
I
which
love
was
it.
hilarious, but I loved.
Yeah. So good.
I thought it was absolutely great.
So like much like just beautiful GIF material.
If
oh my God.
at that point they had wanted to show me the bad CG mind squid, then I would have been a little bit more accepting. I still think it should be
what you're
out.
saying about it. It should just be not be there.
Yeah.
Like because like that bit like we use your dad and stuff. I think would have been a lot spookier if I hadn't already seen the CG.
Right.
Like
it's like okay, we use your dad as hosts, but what are we? Like I think, and they tell us it's like imagine the horror to have no individuality, to share all of your memories with all of the rest of your kind all the time.
Yeah, that's what death looks like for you. Is like your corpse
I almost
being
feel
puppeted
like
around by
in
one of
some
these
ways
things.
it's more Lovecraftian to not show it.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Absolutely.
That horror beyond understanding.
I would say that's one of the only like big examples of overplaying their hand.
Something I think that could have been done much less cornily. You're talking about words that don't exist.
Cornely.
Cornely.
Yeah, sure.
Jennifer Cornely. Something I think that could have been way less corny is the final fight scene between the two. The mind fight.
At that point, though, I was all in for it. It's so bad.
Yeah.
You didn't watch this one with us, Cleveland, because it was before you were on the show, but you know what that reminded me of, Ben? The end of fear.com.com.
You're so right.
Yeah.
Though. You're so right.
Yeah.
But I
liked this way more.
in this one.
Fear.com remains, for me, the worst film we've ever watched for this show.
Glad I wasn't there.
Yeah, I would agree.
I cannot think of a worse film to this day. It gave me the same kind of vibes with like the bad CG and just like the general stupidity of it. But it's like so strangely, the film prepared me for that in a way that I was totally on board by the time it happened. It's weird. It's almost like the film conditions you to be ready for that nonsense. Because nonsense
I feel conditioned. I feel very conditioned after watching this.
Yeah, well, it's an escalation throughout the movie to the point where it's way easier to buy into that.
In comic book form, too, I think this would work well, graphic novel form or like written without the visuals, because it's so like nebulous. I bring that up largely because like how Gaiman-esque this is as well.
Yeah, sure.
It's all very dream-like. It's all mysterious. Big clocks.
Oh yeah, I think if you're gonna do a fucking like
edgy
psychic mind fight, there's many ways to do that cooler than.
Oh yeah, a good example is like
the way
like
they did in
Dream
this movie.
and Satan in Sandman. There are some very cool ways to do that, and even I hate saying it, but like the Dormammu fight in Doctor Strange, like there are ways to make that cooler, but again, modern with like modern.
Well, yeah,
tech.
I'm talking about with like less
During the time, yeah.
effects, because I think what makes the shit so bad and so like funny is how terrible the effects are.
Well, it's literally like warpy mind lasers. Like,
yeah,
instead of like
the
them
bullet,
using their brains and their consciousnesses
yeah.
to war against each other, they're literally going wee 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 and like dilating like circular ghost pattern is coming out of their heads.
It's the bullet.
So like it's like 1950s cheesy stuff.
It's the slow motion bullet effect from the Matrix,
Yeah.
but just coming out of their heads.
Like it really it didn't
doesn't
have that sound to it, but it might as well have.
Well,
Just
no,
like,
it had a worse sound. It had, if you noticed, every time John uses the tuning, it makes like a shiny, sparkly sound, like if you opened a chest in a video game and it's got gold inside. Yeah. That's the sound it made every time.
Almost like a tuning fork, I think.
No.
was what they were maybe going for.
They did not succeed in that. It was like a cartoon sound of like shiny, sparkly gems. That was the sound it made every time they used their psychic powers. So like that is a big big old part of it. But it's like they almost do like a Harry Potter thing where it's like just these two people just like throwing energy at each other and just like pushing a big ball of force back and forth. But then they levitate up into the sky, which looks way worse somehow.
Very Neo and Agent Smith.
Damn, it's almost like The Matrix came out after this movie.
Yeah, we could do that. Gripes. I have one gripe. It's the last scene. I love how the film ends generally. They don't get back to Earth. He gains these godlike powers, and now the monkeys are running the circus.
He just recreates the world
Yeah.
into a nicer vision. The sun comes up for once.
Yeah, people now have the machine. They have the god controls. That's fine and dandy. What I do not think is fine and dandy is how he sets it all up and then like in a simulator, like roller coaster tycoon situation, like just kind of like plucks up Jennifer Connelly and like puts her at the end of the pier and then walks out and fakes it.
So he can go fall in love with her all over again.
And it's like, that's cool and all, but also like you just removed all agency from that equation. That's weird. Tell her you're God. Like she has a right to know. Like
she wouldn't believe that would shatter her fucking sanity if you're like, by the way, I am now the god of this world. It's not what you think it is. I created this scenario.
That would shatter her brain. She'd just be like,
absolutely
it
would
shatter
I mean,
your
for a
brain.
minute, but then he could show her and he could explain it.
Okay.
And like,
That would still shatter your
his
sanity.
brain isn't shattered. He's good. He's God now.
because he did it. He's the one who did it.
Yeah, but he was
And
just
he
a person to begin with. That should have shattered his brain. He didn't just do it to
he's-
begin with. He was just a normal Earth
No,
person.
but he's not just a normal Earth person. He's the advancement of evolution. That's why he had the
was able
ability
to do it.
He had the ability
He's
to
the chosen
tune.
one, yeah.
Why? Yeah, he's Neo.
Yeah.
That's why he didn't fall asleep during the tuning every night. That's why he has these abilities, and that the stranger's abilities don't affect him in the same way.
I just don't like that he basically turns
it's-
Jennifer Connelly into a Barbie doll puppet. It's a little weird.
I mean, sure, we could go at length into the morality of what a human would do with God's powers and what is moral and ethical.
Just go read Watchmen. Yeah.
You know,
He's just Dr. Manhattan at that point.
basically. I mean, the ending is fucking hokey, but everything that's come before it is like also insanely hokey.
Yeah.
So at that point, I didn't mind it.
The Hulk is fine. It was just the agency being removed. That's all I was like, that's a little weird because it's a weird choice. I get it. Like he wants to relive, the whole thing, but like we just see him like descend down, like still like achieving. Dude just achieved Godhead. That's the first thing he
He's
does.
trying to get God.
No. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, no.
Godhead achieved, if you know what I mean.
Achievement unlocked. There you go. You did it.
I mean, I think there's something to be said for the ending thematically from like a metaphysical standpoint. He decides to reshape the world into a memory that he has that was never actually real to begin with. I think that is an interesting thing that you could deconstruct because he has no true memories. Like the strangers, assured that everything that any of these people remember is a fabrication, but by the time that he defeats them, it's all he has. So he decides to reshape the world into a false memory. And I think that is interesting, that he maintains the individuality that he has and that he still loves his wife, even if maybe she wasn't ever really his wife.
Ah, yeah. Well, I mean, see, that I'm into. I'm into the idea of, like, even though their memories were false, their love was real. That's cool.
And I think that goes into the core idea of what the strangers are trying to do, where, changing things
shouldn't change who you are as an individual.
And seeing what stays the same. And I think that's actually kind of poignant in a way. That's a really interesting way of approaching that. I didn't really think of it that way at the time. On top of that, it's like that idea of him creating a vision for the future based on whatever glimpses of the past he can recollect. And essentially all he has. There is no future without, looking at the past in that
Right,
respect,
even if
so.
the past does not actually exist, you have to still do something. And I think the long-term implications are interesting and maybe kind of scary as well, because like he is now the only one in this world who has the power to change things, but he is also very human. So what will the future become? How will he change the world?
That's
in
the
his
thing.
image?
That's why I think another reason why I was kind of primed to be a little concerned with the ending, because right before that, he has a conversation with the doctor where it looks like he's going mad with power, because he's like floating up in the air being like, I can change anything. And it's like that,
I
like,
control the
it's
machine
that, like, sense
now.
of exactly like that sense of like overwhelming power corrupting absolutely, and delusions of grandeur becoming reality.
Sure.
Like by every hallmark, he should shift supervillain at that point.
I mean, I think
the next thing he does is like go over and puppet Jennifer Connelly was weird to me. Like
the long-term implications beyond the story that exists, I think, have a lot of potentially problematic aspects.
Well, it's definitely problematic because it means the flat earthers are right.
Damn. But I mean, I think in just like the simple terms of the narrative, like all he's chasing the entire time is two things or three things: the sunshine, the ocean, and love. All of which the strangers hate, that are poisonous to them. Being sort of like an ideal that like he's reaching for, I think in the context of the story is good and wholesome. Like if we want to get really realistic about it, like yeah, all of a sudden this human man is God. Like that seems like a disaster. Oops, boops.
Godhead.
We fucked up. We fucked up, but it's like he's spending the entire movie chasing a simple idea of utopia amidst the dystopia. He's searching for individuality amongst the collective, and like that's fine in the context of the movie. It works. It's okay. One of my only gripes with this movie is I can't stand Kiefer Sutherland in this movie. I think he's really obnoxious.
He is very over the top.
Interesting. I generally cannot stand the man.
I
liked his performance in this.
I like him as an actor. I don't really like him in this movie.
Yeah, we are on the exact opposite end of that one.
Interesting. I think it's just because he is the vessel for a lot of the exposition in this movie. And his character has this very particular way of speaking where he's like gasping between every couple of words. So he talks like this. And when you have to give an entire exposition like this, it gets really tiresome.
It is pretty exciting.
It's just not a good way to deliver exposition.
Contextually, it makes sense, but. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think the idea of his character, like the only human that the strangers have allowed to like see the machine
behind the curtain,
because they need him to craft false memories for him because they cannot do it themselves as a being that does not understand individuality. So I think like the idea of his character is very cool. But like the way he delivers it, and I think that comes down to direction rather than like him as an actor. I just think like, man, it like that way of delivering exposition is exhausting. If you're gonna have a character like talking a lot, don't have them talk in a way that's annoying to listen to.
Yeah.
Like don't just stop between every couple of words. No, thank you.
I liked his eyeball makeup.
Oh yeah, like
and his weird haircut. His broccoli weird, hair was great.
His weird Nazi broccoli haircut.
Little glasses.
His little glasses.
Because like it's like the height of his career around then, and he's playing in all of his other roles, he's playing like
I would say
spy
24
action
is
hero,
24
whatever.
is the height of his career. This is pre-24,
right? But like we're
close
leading
enough.
into the like he's in his prime,
Yeah.
And to dress him up with a weird wig and make him like the kind of sniveling mad scientist character is nice.
Yeah.
Take the actor who could have easily been the protagonist of this movie and make him the weird scientist instead.
I like the character.
I'm very here for that.
I like the character and I like the actor. I don't necessarily like his direction. I think that's what it comes down to. I think that he's a very fun character, and like as a vessel for exposition, like we need that in this movie. One of the few movies where I will say that like I do need exposition, please. This movie, and I think he's fine for that. And I really like the scene where we see like the tuning for the first time, and we see this poor kind of like white trash family become like affluent.
The table,
yeah,
like pulling
just
apart.
like the whole thing, yeah, just like them shifting their home from like a shitty 1-bedroom apartment into like a mansion, and like Kiefer Sutherland sort of being our lens for that whole thing. I thought that was really cool.
There's some weird ADR in that scene.
Yeah, there is some weird ADR in that scene.
I think there's a smidgen of justification only because they've all been made so artificial that like stylistically it enhances that dollhouse vibe, but also it bad. It
bad,
does.
yeah. By the end of it, I was like,
it's just
I
that
was
one
okay,
scene.
but
Like where there's weird ADR.
Well, what it seemed like is that actress.
Could have been a director's cut thing.
What it seemed to me in that scene is that by the end of it, when I saw like the beginning point versus the end point, because when they're transformed into like the wealthy family and she talks to the husband at the end, it's not ADR. You can tell. And I think what it is that maybe she was just such a bad actress that she couldn't do different accents or voices or affects. And so to make her sound different, they ADR'd her.
Yeah.
Could
be that. Could be director's cut.
I don't know. It was bad.
I'd buy that.
That pretty close to covers everything that I want to talk about.
Yeah, I think all the
I think
references
that's pretty
in there.
much everything I wanted
Cool.
to say.
Well, Cleve, this was your pick, so why don't you rate it first?
Okay, so one of like the aspects of like the hero's journey is like right before the ending, the hero like kills the villain, achieves the sword of power or whatever, and then comes back home changed by it. And the movie ends with him getting the sword of power and coming back home and being the same. Like,
He has no home to come back to.
yeah, but the home part isn't the thing. It's the him being changed, and so he achieves godhead as a regular man, and then everything's fine. Weird to me, but I don't know if I were to remove half a point from this for it. I don't think I will. I think I'm gonna go ahead because I adore literally everything else about this movie. I'm giving it a 5. It's a delight. It is a very stinky cheese. And I love stinky cheeses. And it's very me. It's very fun. It makes like the nebulousness of Our Game It Stares Back feel like a sitcom pilot. Or plot by comparison. It's nutty. This movie, and maybe that's just it's a forest for the trees thing. But wow, I loved it.
Ben?
Okay, yeah, I thought this was a beautiful mess. Very convoluted, ton of different ideas. Most of them worked. There were a couple things here or there where it's like a little much. I love the style of this movie. Way better than The Matrix. This should be held in the critical regard and collective memory, speaking of that, that The Matrix is held in.
Nice.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I had a few minor gripes with the pacing in the first act, and I had a few minor gripes with some of the effects. Most of them held up, but there were a few that were noticeable. But overall, it's a really great movie, and I would definitely recommend it for any sci-fi fan. I'm going to give it a 4.
Nice. There's no token paid. Sorry, sorry. That's what I was trying to say. Like, there's no cost. He doesn't like lose anything other than like. Anyway, all right. Sorry.
Well, he loses the world that he knows.
That's true. Like,
Yeah,
that's
he
the price.
loses everything that he knows,
Yeah.
I think.
So he loses it first and then gains the power. That's fine.
I mean, yeah, I really enjoyed this movie as well. I could not agree with you more, Ben. I think that culturally, this movie has a lot more impact than The Matrix does, and I think The Matrix stole a lot of what makes this movie good. And I wish that the roles were reversed, and I wish that more people talked about Dark City the way that they do The Matrix. I enjoyed it quite a bit. The CG is fucking terrible, but the matte paintings and the miniatures and the makeup and everything, fantastic. The style, incredible. Everything that I loved. It's just a gorgeous, fucking convoluted hodgepodge of ideas, some of which are dumb, but some of which are actually really effective. Yeah.
Poignant
in many, many ways. This is a really weird movie, but I enjoyed the shit out of it. I'm going to give it a strong 4 as well, to mirror you, Ben. So that'll be an average of 4.3 out of 5 for Dark City. That was a fucking fun movie.
I think it was everything I wanted it to
surprise.
be.
I really enjoyed everything about that viewing experience.
I really had
great.
no idea what to expect going in.
Me either.
And I was very pleasantly surprised.
Way more rich than Guyver.
Fun for different reasons, but yeah, like you have been on a roll of picking like very weird,
Fucking out there.
weird fun films for us to watch, so I can't complain. Speaking of, what's next week?
So,
week?
this quarantine has really made me feel some type of way. I don't know about you guys,
I'm feeling some type of way.
but I'm almost getting cabin fever.
Yes.
That's right. We're covering cabin fever next week.
Fuck yes, fuck yes, fuck yes, fuck
So
yes.
I will make some pancakes for everyone, and we'll have a little sit down and watch classic.
I am
Classic film.
so excited.
I'm going in with no knowledge.
You've never seen Cabin Fever? Oh my god.
Okay, don't read anything.
won't.
Don't.
Usual
yeah.
fare, you know me.
Yep.
I will
wouldn't dream
say,
of it.
all I'll say about my initial thoughts on Cabin Fever before we talk about it is I think that it is, first of all, I think it's Eli Roth's best film. And
Eli Roth.
I also think that it is, along with Cabin in the Woods, one of my favorite, if not my favorite, horror satire films of all time.
And it is hella timely right now.
And it's hella timely because we are all probably, and you listeners at home are probably developing cabin fever as well. And God only knows where we'll all be next week when we do this episode. So come back and lose your mind with us. Speaking of losing our minds, I need to get paid, Cleveland. Who is sponsoring the episode this week?
Unofficially, this episode is sponsored by Corona, the beer. I feel really bad for them, guys. Like, I don't know, they didn't do anything wrong, and that was just their name. And I don't know, that sucks. You know, that's gotta be suck to be a beer company that just happens to have the same name as the horrible virus that is sweeping the planet. Bummer, you know, like all those shots of desolate shelves that have just been consumed by the raw, frightened masses, except for the Corona bottles. Like, it's so weird. Like, as panicking as everyone is, I would think that there would be more ironic purchases.
Are you? I know. You said you feel sorry for them. We're still getting paid though, right?
Yeah, they're still paying us for this, right? Corona?
The sponsor shelf is glowing an odd color. I'd call it puce, but there are more stripes in it. And it tells me that there is a different sponsor this week.
Whoa, double sponsor.
The sponsor is the big...
The big. Wow.
The sponsor is the big sitting thing inside of your cortex
Oh.
that vibrates suddenly in the middle of the night waking you.
Wow.
But you do not remember why you have woken. Thus speaketh the sponsor shelf.
Call me Mr. Shelf, because that was a great sponsor.
Guys, do we have a sponsor this week?
No.
Wasn't it Corona?
I think it was, yeah. All right, cool. All right. Just double checking.
If you have to break quarantine to go out for booze, because we all gotta stay boozed up in this trying time, it's hard to be home alone sober. So you know what? Go out and support your local cerveza and pick up some Corona.
But be careful getting too drunk, because you need that immune system.
Don't drink if you're sick either.
Corona
don't
will
do that.
make your immune system stronger. If you're sick, drink more.
This episode is not brought to you by any medical health associations.
This episode is brought to you by irresponsible drinking. Get out there. And,
Don't get out there. Don't get out there.
Get in there and
Not even ironically.
get in there and do it. Irresponsible drinking. The more you know, the
less you know.
You have the power.
And I know we were joking about having cabin fever, but boys.
Boys. Speaking of boys, you can find us boys on
Being Boys.
Being Boys. Wherever you're listening to this, if you can,
We're boys.
if we're the boys, and we're here listening, or you're listening to us. So wherever you're listening to this,
Maybe in Boise.
Yeah, there maybe is somebody who listening to this in Boise.
Anything's possible in the Dark City.
If you're our one listener in Boise, or if you're not our one listener in Boise,
Or maybe all of our listeners are in Boise.
God damn it, Cleveland. I'm trying to get to the point. Smash those 5 stars and leave a nice review. It's almost like we're interacting with you in person and breaking quarantine, and we
will give you Godhead.
Yes, we will provide and grant unto you the best Godhead, the sloppiest Godhead.
No! Oh no.
But only if you leave a 5-star rating and a nice review. Otherwise, you can get the
The
God
Mr. Teeth.
Dead.
dead. That's
God is dead.
Yeah, you'll get Mr.
2020, God is dead.
You'll get Mr. Teeth instead of Godhead.
Oh no!
Follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod and on letterbox.com/PodPeoplePod, where you'll find a list of all the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and links to those episodes. You can find me on Twitter at Deep State Aussie. I'm quarantine posting.
I'm on Twitter at Mr. Sheets.
And I'm rarely tweeting for Light Dog Studios. We hunker down and continue to work up the next chapter of It Stares Back. It's I swear to God, it's coming.
We're working on it.
Oh yeah, one step at a time.
And in these uncertain times, all we have is each other. But practice social distancing
Please.
and have each other from a distance.
Yeah.
Don't
go to big events, you morons.
We'll be here. Stay home and stay cozy with us. And we will continue to spit softly into your ears.
The only cabin fever you need is the episode next week.
That's right.
And the musical number from Muppet Treasure Island.
Cabin D's nuts. Good night, everybody.